Chapter 3. The windshield wipers squeaked and thumped, hissed and clicked. The strange collection of sounds lulled me into a sort of half-stare and half-sleep. "Here we are," Mr. Carpenter said. I sat up as the car pulled to the curb. I tried looking through the fogged-up window, but I couldn't see anything. I took a swipe at the window. "Keep your dirty hands off the glass," Mrs. Carpenter snarled. "I'll leave him alone. He isn't hurting anything. Come on, Jenkins, let's go." The street was quiet. Everything in sight was covered by a pretty white blanket of snow. Even the garbage cans in front of all the houses along the street had little white hats on them. Mr. Carpenter opened a black metal gate and passed through it. Mrs. Carpenter followed him, and I followed her. We walked around to the back of the house, climbed the stairs, and went in through the kitchen. The room was warm and quiet. There was a small lamp lit over a large kitchen table. The room was sparkling clean. Mrs. Carpenter gave me some paper and a pencil and told me to sit at the small table. My table was a small wooden table with a chair to match. It was across the room from the large table with the lamp above it. She switched on the ceiling light and started fixing a pot of coffee. The clock above the stove said 5:45 p.m. "Can I help you?" I asked. "No," she was abrupt. "You break something and then where will my profits go?" I didn't understand the profits part, but I did understand the no. When she finished, she turned off the ceiling light and left the room. I could hear whispers through the closed door. I was sure they were talking about me. The room grew darker as the daylight faded. What I thought was a little light from the lamp above the big table wasn't any light at all. It only lit the area of the table. The walls with sink, stove, and icebox were in the dark shadows. So was I. Mrs. Carpenter came back into the kitchen and turned on the ceiling light. She began to prepare dinner. Mr. Carpenter came in and sat at the big table. He unwrinkled a newspaper and started to read. "There's a Bogart film at the Kings Park," he told her. "Treasure of the Sierra Madre." "You know I can't go anywhere with this damn kid around." "Well, who the hell asked you to take him?" He dropped his paper to the table. "You know we need the money," she said. Then she added sarcastically, "You certainly don't earn enough, and I can't work, sickly as I am." He grunted, then continued to read his paper. She served him a sandwich. "Isn't he going to eat?" he asked. I perked up. I was hungry. I wouldn't mind one of those sandwiches. "No, he told me he ate plenty before he left home." She lied, but I didn't know why. I didn't like this lady. I didn't like her at all. After Mr. and Mrs. Carpenter left the kitchen, I drew a picture of Doggy. I put a hat and scarf on him. I made all the dots for the snowflakes and then drew some trees around him. It was the first time Doggy was ever away from his cage and out of the home. I kissed him. Light flooded the room. Mrs. Carpenter came in and yanked me from the chair. She dragged me through the dining room and a foyer, then pushed me into a bedroom. The room was small and bare. There was a bed with a brown blanket and no pillow, a chest like the one at the home, and a chair by the window. The window had no bars. I sat on the bed as Mrs. Carpenter switched off the light. I said goodnight to a closing door. I lay alone in the dark of the small room. It was the first time in my life I was ever alone in a bedroom. I was frightened. Not afraid of the dark or anything like that, just afraid. When I was at home with Mom and my brothers, Larry and Jean, and I slept in one bed, while George and Walter slept in another. We all slept in the same room. I remember how we used to lie in the dark and play alphabet games. Someone would pick a topic like cars or something, and we would all try to name things in that topic with the letters of the alphabet. Gene never played. He always fell asleep right away. I never got much past C or D myself, but it was fun. I sure wish my brothers were here now to play with me. A. Let's see now. Austin Healy. B. Buick. C. In the morning, I dressed and left the bedroom for the kitchen. I passed the staircase in the hall, then stopped. With Mrs. Carpenter in the kitchen, I thought this might be a good time to explore. I climbed the stairs. "Where are you going?" she screamed. She was standing just above me on the stairs. She wasn't in the kitchen at all. I turned in mid-step and scurried down the stairs. I ran through the dining room into the kitchen. I sat at the table, my heart pounding. She came in. I cowered in the chair, covering my ears. She brushed past me, heading for her work counter. She didn't hit me. She switched on a radio next to her. A man with a very deep voice said, does everything. She changed stations. Another man with an even deeper voice said, the guiding light. A whole bunch of high-pitched voices began singing a jingle as Mrs. Carpenter began speaking to me from over her shoulder. You better get used to the rules around here, or I'll beat the daylights out of you. I tried listening to her and the singers. The bedroom is for sleeping. The rest of the house is off limits to you. You're to sit at that table and that table only. If you don't, you'll get it, understand? I nodded my head, but she didn't see me. Do you understand? She screeched. I jolted to attention in the chair. Yes, I said. Yes, ma'am, she added. Yes, ma'am, I repeated. And if you break anything around here, God help you, she mumbled. I make little enough money off you as it is. She turned from the counter and rushed at me. I ducked my head below my hands. She plopped a bowl down in front of me. Eat, she commanded. She went back to her counter. There was a grayish blob of icy stuff. I think it was oatmeal, but I couldn't be sure. It was thick and gluey, and it smelled funny. I tasted it. Ugh, I don't like this stuff. Again, she rushed at me, and I ducked. She snatched up the bowl. As I waited for her to bring me something else, I looked around for my picture of Doggy. Do you see my picture anywhere, ma'am? I threw it out. I don't want a whole lot of junk cluttering up my kitchen. I felt badly. It hurt me to think of Doggy in the garbage. I decided if I ever drew something I wanted, I'd never leave it lying around. Mrs. Carpenter finished her work at the counter, switched off the radio, and left the room. She didn't fix me anything else. I guess I wasn't surprised. Hungry maybe, but not surprised. I sat looking at the wall next to the table. There was a lot more on the wall than I realized. There were tiny dots and little lines. There were bumps and cracks. At about 1 o'clock, I stuck my head out the door and called, Mrs. Carpenter, ma'am? What do you want? She startled me. She was sitting not 5 feet from the door. I'm hungry. I was wondering. We eat breakfast and dinner around here, and that's all, she snarled. I can't afford to be feeding you anytime you feel like eating. Besides, you're not worth it, you dirty little bastard. Now get back to your table. I pulled my head into the kitchen. I returned to the table and buried my head in my arms. I didn't want her to hear me crying. The day gave way to night and the room darkened. I sat looking at the thin strip of light working its way in under the door from the dining room. I was falling off to sleep when Mrs. Carpenter came in. I covered my eyes to readjust the room light. She went to work at her counter. She was making hamburgers for dinner. I was starving. When they started to cook, they smelled and sounded wonderful. I couldn't imagine how she could ruin them, but I decided I'd better wait until I tasted them. Mr. Carpenter came in at 7:15. He sat at the big table and unfolded his paper. He read a few things to her, but she didn't seem interested. He didn't speak to me at all. I sure would like to get a television set, he said. A what? A television set? How can we afford one of those? She asked. They're really improving them, you know. Look how many programs are on the air now. He held up part of the paper for her to look at. She didn't. What's wrong with the radio? She asked. Nothing. I like the radio, but I thought a television would be nice. Texaco Star Theater, The Life of Riley, Toast of Frank. Forget about the television sets and eat. She served each of them a hamburger. She placed the same bowl of gray gook I had rejected that morning in front of me. I was disappointed. I decided to try it again. I tasted it. It was cold and sticky and awful. I could barely get the mouthful down before gagging. I pushed it away. Mr. Carpenter finished his hamburger and left. I covered my head with my arms until she finished cleaning up. She took the bowl from the table but said nothing. When I was sure she wasn't going to hit me, I uncovered my head. She turned off the ceiling light and left the room. I sat at the little table and wondered if I'd ever eat again. I started to think about the first days at the Home of the Angels when I didn't eat for a long time. I wished I had some of that stew now. Even a piece of bread or a roll would be great. I wished I was back at the home with Mark and Doggy. I drew another picture of Doggy. This time he was standing in the middle of all those trees with a great pile of hamburgers next to him. After I kissed him, I folded him up and stuck him in my pocket. The next morning, I sat at the little table in front of the same bowl of sticky stuff. I didn't bother to smell it or taste it or anything. I just pushed it to the edge of the table and closed my eyes. The next little tap sent it crashing to the floor. Mrs. Carpenter went into a rage. She grabbed me by the hair and yanked me from the chair. She punched me in the side of the head and threw me to the floor. I drew in my arms and legs to make myself a smaller target, but it didn't help. She smashed me across the back with a stick or something. On the second hit, she caught me across the back of my legs. I crawled under the big table. Her third shot hit the table legs and the chairs. "Come out," she screamed. I wouldn't move. She again hit the sides of the table legs with her stick. I crawled in deeper. She mumbled to herself while she cleaned up the pieces of the broken bowl. She slammed things around and took one more shot at the table legs before she gave up and left the room. I lay piled up on the floor. I began to feel the pain in my back and legs. I thought I might die under this table, and maybe it would be soon. I was hurting and hungry. I reached down into my pocket and pulled out Doggie's picture. I kissed him and pressed him close to my face. "I don't think Mom's ever going to come for us," I told him. "I don't think we're ever going to leave this place." I closed my eyes. "Doggie, I'm going to stay under here forever." I clenched Doggie tightly in my hand. The floor was hard and cold. Each time I thought I heard her coming, I held my breath. The table and chair legs were like the bars of a cage around me. This time they weren't keeping me in, they were keeping her out. The hours passed slowly. The morning sun turned to afternoon shadows, then the shadows to night. I lay on the floor and watched a thin strip of light under the kitchen door. I was awakened by Mrs. Carpenter moving around the kitchen. I could see only her legs and feet. I knew she was fixing dinner. I could smell it. "Where's Jenkins?" Mr. Carpenter asked as he entered the room. He didn't wipe his feet very well. The edges of his shoes were still wet from the snow. "He's under the table." "Under the table? What's he doing under there?" He poked his head under to see me. "He's playing or something. What the hell do I know about these damn kids? Half of them are crazy," she said. "Hey, son, what are you doing down there?" I crawled in deeper. I stuffed Doggie in my pocket for fear they might take him and throw him in the garbage again. "What's the matter, Jenkins?" "Nothing." "Come out of there, then. Come on out of there." He offered me his hand. He had always been nice to me. He wasn't very friendly or anything like that, but he'd never hurt me. I gave him my hand and crawled out. As I stood up, he touched my back and I winced. "Did you hit him?" he asked sternly. "No," she lied. He lifted my shirt and saw the welt mark. "You hit him, damn it." I did not. He fell. "That's it, Edna. Hit him one more time and he goes back. You hear me? Money or no money, he goes back. I'm not going to have you beating up all these kids. You listen to me, Edna?" "He fell, damn it. I didn't hit him," she screamed. He held my shoulders and looked me in the eye. "Now don't be afraid, Jenkins. Did she hit you?" I didn't have to answer him. My tears came easily. "I'm warning you, Edna." She slammed things around the counter. "He breaks my good bowl, and that's okay. Don't punish him. Oh, no. Just mollycoddle the son of a bitch." Mr. Carpenter sat me at the little table. He sat at his usual place and picked up his newspaper. I stared at the spots on the wall and planned my escape. I had to get out of here before he left for work in the morning. She served the dinner. I didn't bother to look at what they were having. It didn't matter. "Aren't you going to feed him?" he asked. "After he breaks my good china? Not in your life." Mr. Carpenter was now his usual self. He said nothing. With dinner now over and the Carpenters gone from the room, I sat and watched the thin strip of light. I was ready. I went over to the back door and tugged. It was locked. I opened one of the two bolts. The other one I couldn't reach without a chair. As quietly as I could, I got a chair from the big table. I pushed as hard as I could, but the bolt wouldn't open. I searched around the kitchen for something I might use to hit it. In one of the bottom cabinets, I found two things: the hammer I needed for the bolt and a box of Jell-O powder. I tore open the box and tasted it. "Wow, that's sour," I said quietly. I took another taste. I was so hungry it didn't matter how sour it was. I was going to eat it. My eyes were almost completely closed from the sourness of the Jell-O. I ate the whole box before I could get my eyes open again. I crushed up the empty box and stuck it in my pocket. I returned to the door. I tapped lightly at the bolt on the door, but nothing happened. I knew I'd have to give it one good whack. What if I can't get the chair out of the way before she gets in here? I thought out loud. What difference does it make anyway? She's gonna kill me anyway. I closed my eyes and swung as hard as I could. I missed. The hammer went crashing through one of the panes of glass in the door. Mrs. Carpenter was there in a flash. Before I could even think about getting down from the chair, the room was ablaze with light and she was on me. She punched me in the stomach and knocked me to the floor. She began kicking me. "The hell is going on in here?" Mr. Carpenter screamed as he rushed into the room. "I'm gonna kill him," she screeched. I believed her. Her eyes were red with fire. She leaned down and clenched my shirt with her hand. She lifted me straight off the floor a few feet, then dropped me. He grabbed her arm and swung her around. I thought he was going to hit her, but he didn't. He just held her off. "That's it, Edna. Tomorrow he goes back."